You're standing at the foot of a mountain in one of the emptiest deserts on Earth. There are no towns, no roads, no sign that a single human being has ever lived here. And then you see them, iron pipes. Dozens of them, running straight through solid stone and vanishing down into a saltwater lake behind you. Someone built this, but the rock the pipes are buried in has not been disturbed in 150,000 years. That is the number that stopped me cold, because the official story says these pipes are natural, and the more I checked, the less that story held together. The trail starts with a single news report from June of 2002 and a smeltery engineer named Liu Shaolin who tested the metal and found something he could not name. Let me tell you exactly where you are, because the location matters more than anyone admits. This is Mount Baigong, about 40 kilometers southwest of a small city called Delingha in Qinghai province, deep in the Qaidam Basin of northwestern China. It is one of the driest, highest, most desolate places in Asia. The mountain itself is a strange thing. It rises out of flat desert like a rough pyramid, pale and cracked, with 3 triangular caves cut into its face. 2 of those caves collapsed long ago. The third is still open. And when the first investigators walked inside, they found a pipe as wide across as a dinner plate running from the floor up through the ceiling straight into rock that had never been broken. I remember the night I first found the original Xinhua Wire report, translated and buried in an old archive forum thread, and I actually sat back from my screen because the details were too specific to be a hoax someone dreamed up for clicks. This was China's own state news agency, not a tabloid, not a fringe blog. The government's official press service reporting that a team of scientists was being sent to a desert mountain to explain iron pipes that should not exist. So let me lay out what they actually found, piece by piece, the way I did. Inside the open cave, there is the large pipe I mentioned, roughly 40 centimeters across, running through the top of the cave. Directly opposite it, another pipe of the same size runs into the ground. There are more, thinner ones, some no wider than a toothpick, threading through the rock like veins. But the caves are only the beginning. Walk out of the mountain and down to the shore of Toson Lake, a bitter saltwater lake just over 100 meters from the cave mouth, and the pipes are everywhere. Dozens of them jut out of the sand along the beach. Some stand upright, some lie flat. They range from tiny to that same 40 centimeters wide. And here's the part that made the hair stand up on my arms. Many of them run directly into the lake and continue underneath the water. They are oriented. They point. They have a direction, the way a plumbing system has a direction. This is not a random scatter of rocks that happen to look tube-shaped. This is a field of hollow metal tubes of varying sizes, arranged around a single mountain and running into a single lake. And the first question any honest person asks is the same question I asked: who put them there? Because the official answer would eventually be nobody, and that is where the cracks start to show. The pipes are hollow. That is the first thing that breaks the easy explanation. When the local investigators examined them, they found the tubes had genuine open channels running through their centers, some of them clean and smooth-walled. A rock that merely looks like a pipe is solid. These were not solid. They carried a void down their length, the way an actual pipe carries water. And several of them were rusted a deep reddish brown, the color of oxidized iron, which brings me to the test that started everything. A local official named Qin Jianwen took samples of the pipe material to the nearest facility that could analyze metal, a smeltery in Delingha. The engineer who ran the analysis was named Liu Shaolin, and his results, reported directly by Xinhua, are the anchor this entire mystery hangs on. The pipes were made mostly of iron oxide, silicon dioxide, and calcium oxide. The silicon and calcium made sense. Those come from the surrounding sandstone, from the ground itself, the kind of minerals you would expect any buried object to pick up over time. But then Liu Shaolin reported that more than 8% of the material was of a composition he could not identify. 8% unknown. An engineer, standing in a working smeltery, with the equipment to analyze metal every single day, looked at his own results and said, in effect, "I do not know what this is." Now stay with me, because a skeptic hears 8% unknown and thinks that just means the equipment could not label it, not that it is alien. And that is a fair thought. I had the same one. Hold on to it, because I am going to come back to that exact objection and test it against the evidence later, and it does not survive the way you would expect. But the composition was not even the strangest reading, because the next thing they measured was radiation, and the mountain, according to the reports that followed, registered levels of radioactivity higher than the surrounding desert. Combine that with the shape of the mountain, that rough pyramid, and the 3 cave mouths, and the 2 collapsed tunnels, and a saltwater lake full of oriented pipes, and you can understand why the theory that spread next spread as fast as it did. Because the people who lived nearest to this place did not reach for a geology textbook, they reached for the sky. The theory that took hold locally was that Mount Baigong was not a natural mountain at all, but the remains of an ancient launch installation or a piece of machinery left behind by something that did not come from Earth. And I want to be careful here because the moment you say the word alien, a certain kind of viewer rolls their eyes and reaches for the mouse. I almost did too, but look at why they said it. They did not say it because they wanted a fantasy. They said it because they were standing in front of a piping system in a place where no human civilization had ever built anything, in rock that predated every known culture on the continent, and no one could give them a better answer. The alien theory was not the cause of the mystery. It was a symptom of how badly the normal explanations were failing, and a scientist actually said so, on the record. His name was Yang Ji, and he was a researcher connected to the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. When asked about the extraterrestrial idea, he did not laugh it off. He said the theory was, in his words, understandable and worth taking seriously. He said it was something science should investigate rather than dismiss. Think about what it takes for an academic to say that out loud to a national news agency. He was not endorsing little green men. He was admitting that the thing sitting in that desert was strange enough that the polite scientific reflex, the reflex to explain it away, did not feel honest to him. So, the pipes are hollow. The metal is 8% unidentified. The site is faintly radioactive. And a credentialed researcher went on record saying the impossible explanation deserved a hearing. Therefore, the real question is not whether this is weird. It clearly is. The real question is the number I opened with. How old is it? Because everything, absolutely everything, depends on the age. And this is where the timeline detonates. The pipes are embedded in sandstone, not lying on top of it. Embedded in it, running through it, fused to it. And that matters, because sandstone forms over immense stretches of time as sediment compresses layer by layer into solid rock. For a pipe to be inside that rock, threaded through it, the pipe has to be at least as old as the surrounding stone, or the two could never have locked together the way they have. And the sandstone at Mount Baigong has been dated to a range that reaches back, by the estimates that circulated with the original reports, somewhere in the region of 150,000 years. Sit with that. 150,000 years ago, there was no iron smelting anywhere on Earth. Human beings would not learn to work iron until roughly 3,000 years before the present. Before that, bronze. Before that, copper. Before that, stone. 150,000 years ago, our own species was barely emerging in Africa. There were no cities, no forges, no metallurgy. No one on the planet capable of shaping a single iron pipe, let alone burying an entire array of them around a desert mountain and running them into a lake. Before I show you the boring answer that everyone was so eager to accept, I want to stop on something you have felt before. You finish a documentary like this one near midnight, the Baigong pipes still turning in your head, and you go looking for what happened next. And you find the trail went cold 20 years ago, nobody retested the 8%, nobody answered the radiation, the case got stamped solved, and everyone walked away. That is the official record for you, handing down a verdict and quietly closing the folder before it shows you the data. That is exactly why I put together 3 volumes for the viewer who wants the whole file, not the headline. They are called First Threshold, Deep Signal, and Hidden Systems. They walk you through the same kind of measurements, the sourced paper trails, and the instrument data you see traced on screen in this very investigation, including the mainstream explanation laid out in full so you can weigh it yourself. Everything I show you here comes straight out of those pages, sources and all. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. And when these cases come roaring back into the headlines told half right, you will be the one judging the next discovery with the data in front of you instead of swallowing the story. So let me be the skeptic for you now, the way you deserve. So you are left with 2 doors, and both of them are terrifying in their own way. Door 1, someone or something made these pipes at a time when nothing on Earth should have been able to. Door 2, they are not really pipes at all, and everything about them, the hollow channels, the oxidized iron, the orientation into the lake, the 8% unknown, All of it is a coincidence of geology so perfect that it fooled engineers and academics standing right in front of it. For a long time, I could not decide which door was harder to believe. And I think that is exactly the discomfort that made the Chinese government do something they rarely do with fringe stories. They funded an official investigation. In 2002, a team of scientists was dispatched to Mount Baigong to settle the question. And I want you to notice something about that decision, because it is the first quiet crack in the wall. You do not send a government scientific expedition into a remote desert to investigate rusty rocks. You send an expedition when the local reports are credible enough and the anomaly is real enough that ignoring it becomes the greater risk. The very act of investigating was an admission that there was something there worth explaining. Now, here is where I have to be the skeptic for you, because if I do not, this is just another campfire story and you deserve better than that. There is a conventional explanation for the Baigong pipes, and it is not stupid. It is actually elegant. And if you are the kind of person sitting there thinking, come on, there has to be a boring answer, this next part is built specifically for you. So do not go anywhere, because this is the exact spot where I expected the mystery to die, and it refused to. The mainstream explanation is that the pipes are not manufactured objects at all. They are fossilized tree roots. The idea goes like this. Millions of years ago, before the Kaidam Basin became the freezing high desert it is today, this region was warmer and wetter, and trees grew here. When those trees died, or when floods buried their trunks and roots in sediment, the wood decayed and left behind long tubular molds in the ground. Over enormous spans of time, iron-rich groundwater seeped through those molds, and minerals precipitated along the walls, coating the shape of the vanished root in iron oxide. The wood rotted away completely, but the mineral shell it left behind hardened into a pipe-shaped tube. Geologists call this process pedogenic pipe formation, or root casting, and it genuinely happens. There are documented examples of these iron root casts in other parts of the world. In Louisiana, in the United States, there are formations that look startlingly like buried plumbing, and they are unquestionably natural. And I will be honest with you. When I first read that explanation, I thought, well, that is it. Case closed. I can move on. The fossil root theory accounts for the tube shape. It accounts for the hollow center, because that is where the wood used to be. It accounts for the iron oxide, because that is the mineral that precipitated. It even accounts for why the pipes come in so many sizes, from thick trunks to thin toothpick roots. On paper, it is a clean, complete answer. But then I started checking it against the specific details in the original reports, and one by one they stopped fitting. Start with the 8%. Remember the engineer Liu Shaolin and the more than 8% of the material he could not identify. Fossilized root casts are made of the minerals in the local groundwater: iron oxide, silica, calcium. That is precisely what a smeltery engineer analyzes for a living. If the composition were ordinary geological minerals, he would have named them. Naming minerals is his entire job, yet a professional metallurgist with metallurgical equipment looked at his own numbers and reported a significant fraction he could not categorize. That is not the signature of a routine iron concretion. That is an anomaly that the tidy fossil root story quietly steps around and hopes you do not notice. Then look at the pipe running through the cave ceiling. Root casts form in soil, in sediment, growing downward and outward the way roots grow. But inside that cave there was a pipe running up through the top of the chamber and into the rock overhead. A root that grew upward into solid stone above an open cavity is not how roots behave and not how sediment settles. The vertical pipe in the ceiling is a geometry the root theory struggles to draw. Then the radioactivity. Fossilized roots are not radioactive. A tube of iron oxide left behind by a rotted tree does not raise a Geiger counter above the background level of the surrounding desert. Yet, the reports describe elevated readings at the site. That detail simply does not belong to a story about ancient tree roots, and the fossil theory has no room for it at all. And then the thing that bothers me most, the orientation. Root casts scatter. Trees put down roots in every direction, tangled, branching, chaotic, but the pipes at Toson Lake are described as running with direction, standing upright along the shore, and diving into the water in a way that reads less like the random sprawl of a root system and more like something laid out with purpose. Nature is capable of astonishing patterns, but a field of hollow tubes, sorted by size, running out of a pyramid-shaped mountain and into a lake, is a lot of coincidences stacked in one small place. So here is where I landed, and I want to be precise about it, because I am not going to sell you a fantasy. The fossil root theory is the best conventional explanation, and it genuinely accounts for some of the pipes. But it does not account for all of them. and it does not touch the 8% or the radiation or the vertical pipe in the ceiling. And that gap, that stubborn residue of details the official answer cannot absorb, is exactly the kind of thing that gets swept under the rug when a case is declared closed. The convenient story took the parts it could explain and simply stopped talking about the parts it could not. Therefore, I went looking for what the actual scientific testing found, the real laboratory work, not the press summaries. And that is where this whole story turns, because the truth that came back is stranger and more beautiful than either the alien theory or the tree root dismissal, and almost nobody talks about it. When researchers finally put the pipe material under proper analysis, they were looking for the signature of life. Because if these were fossilized plant remains, there would be evidence of organic chemistry locked inside the iron, the chemical ghosts of living tissue. And they found it. The samples contained organic plant matter. Inside the mineral, there were traces of substances that come from vegetation, the molecular fingerprints of things that were once alive and green. That confirmed the material had a biological origin. It really did begin as living plants. But here is the detail that stopped me, the one I had never seen in a single one of the dozens of videos that recycle this story. When they examined the internal structure of some of the tubes, they reported finding tree ring patterns, growth rings, the concentric annual layers that a tree lays down 1 year at a time, preserved inside the iron. Think about what that means. These were not just amorphous root molds. At least some of them held the actual recorded structure of a living tree. The rings it grew season after season, frozen and turned to stone and then to metal over an unimaginable span of time. And that reframes everything, because it means the true age of these objects is not 150,000 years. It is far, far older. The trees these formations came from grew when the Kaidam Basin was not a frozen desert 3,000 meters up in the sky, but a warm, low, water-rich landscape covered in forest millions of years ago, in an epoch before the Tibetan Plateau had finished heaving itself into the roof of the world. These pipes are not evidence of a lost human civilization or a visitor from another star. They are the fossilized skeletons of a vanished forest that lived in a China that no human eye ever saw, in a climate that no longer exists, at an altitude that had not yet been born. That is the reveal that the tidy dismissals throw away when they say fossil roots and move on. Because fossil roots makes it sound ordinary. It is not ordinary. What actually happened here is that iron-rich water flowed through the buried remains of an ancient jungle, and atom by atom over epochs, it replaced dead wood with metal, casting the exact shape of trunks and roots and the growth rings inside them into iron. The desert did not preserve a machine. It preserved a forest, and it preserved it so perfectly, in a form so tubular and hollow and metallic, that when human beings finally stumbled onto it 150,000 years later, standing in a place where a forest is now unthinkable, their minds could not accept the truth and leapt instead to spacecraft and aliens. And yet, I still cannot fully close the file, because the 8% unknown was never fully explained. The elevated radiation was never fully explained. The vertical pipe through the cave ceiling was never fully explained. The fossil forest answers the shape and the iron and the organic traces, and it is almost certainly the core of the truth. But there is a residue left over, a handful of measurements that neither the alien theory nor the fossil theory ever accounted for cleanly. And those measurements are sitting in an old report from a smeltery in Dalinga, waiting for someone to test them again with modern equipment. As far as I can find, in more than 20 years, no one has gone back to finish the job. That is the part that keeps me up. Not that the mystery is unsolvable, but that we got most of the way to the answer, found something genuinely magnificent, a metal forest from a lost world, and then left the last stubborn 8% lying in the desert because the story was good enough to stop asking. The forest was real. The trees were real, the rings inside the iron were real, and the fact that a rusted tube in a Chinese salt lake still holds a question no one has bothered to reopen tells you everything about how easily the truly extraordinary gets filed under, solved, and forgotten. What you just recovered is not a story about aliens. It is something stranger and more real, the fossilized bones of a jungle that grew in a place the sky itself has since carried 3 kilometers into the clouds, hidden inside pipes that fooled a nation. If you are the kind of person who cannot accept solved when the numbers still do not add up, who feels that itch when an official answer explains 4 things and quietly ignores the 5th, then you already know why I could not let this one go. So I want you to tell me one thing. What do you think that 8% was? The fraction of the pipe metal that an experienced engineer looked at and could not name more than 20 years ago, and no one has retested since. Leave your answer in the comments. and tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I read them, and the best theories always come from you. If you believe the cases everyone else called closed deserve to be opened back up and run through the evidence one more time, then stay with me, because the next one I am chasing is a structure on the floor of the sea that sonar keeps mapping with edges too straight to be natural. And the survey coordinates are already sitting on my desk. I'm still with you, so here's what comes next. Inside the Unexplained Society, I pick up right where we stopped, walking you through the full evidence, sample by sample. Ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You're not alone here. Thousands of mystery lovers are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, one click, no risk. Now, if that desert discovery left you wondering, wait until you see this. There's a place far older than we ever imagined, and scientists just uncovered something that shouldn't exist. It's starting right here.